brought to you by NetGalley, BookTrib, and Merrill Moss Media. Joining us today is New York Times and international bestselling author Lisa Unger. Lisa has written essays for New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Travel and Leisure Magazine, and NPR. That's just naming a few. And she's also written 14 novels in 26 different languages around the world, including her most recent book, which was released yesterday. Congratulations on Incan Bone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
Welcome. We're so happy to have you, and it's great to get to talk to you today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. What a cool little thing this is. It's neat to do it this way.
Fun, right?
Yeah.
Fun little thing. Oh, well, we're glad to have you. So I'm super excited to talk about this book. Tell us whatever you can without giving too much away about Incan Bone and what's going on with Finley Montgomery.
Okay. Well, Finley really was the voice that drew me into Ink and Bone. It's usually one or a couple of major voices that brings me into the narrative of the book that I'm working on. And Finley is, I kind of think of her sort of as my wild child. She's like 20 years old and she has a gift, a psychic gift that she wishes she could basically just return. She doesn't want to be what she is. And so and unfortunately, it's been this way for her sort of all her life. She's been seeing things that other people can't see since she was a kid. And it's something that really upsets her mother. So it's something that she's kind of been wrestling with and fighting against. And she's finally reached a point where, all the things that she's doing to avoid who she is, all the kind of destructive behaviors, like they've reached critical mass. And she has to return to the town where her mother grew up, the Hollows, to move in with her grandmother, Eloise Montgomery, who is a renowned psychic. And, Finley thinks she's going to live with her grandmother and sort of, leisurely find her way into how she wants to use her abilities. But instead, her return to the Hollows becomes a kind of a baptism by fire as she winds up getting drawn into the investigation of a missing girl. And her story, as well as the story of Mary Gleason, the mother of the missing girl, and Eloise as well, their stories all sort of intertwine and unfold as the story progresses in Ink and Bone.
So interesting. So was there someone or maybe something that inspired Finley for you in Incan Bone?
Well, it's been kind of a twisty road to Finley. Really, I can kind of take it back, like sort of even many, many years. A long time ago, I was working in book publishing, and I had the opportunity to work on a book written by a man named John Edwards, who is a psychic who speaks to the dead. And I was just, I was young in publishing, and I was just an assistant on the project, but he was just this incredibly powerful man, and he did these readings for people that I knew that were like just kind of other, they were otherworldly. Like he was clearly tapped into something, some other plane of existence. And, but also he was just this really lovely guy. He was just like, he could have been anybody. He could have been like your cousin from Long Island, and
Right.
just hanging out with him was just, it was just pleasant to be with him, and he had just like a warmth to him. And it was like, it was the dichotomy of that personality that really stayed with me. And it's in general, it's kind of like these dichotomies that interest me. It's like the narrow place between those things, that dark place. I kind of always like want to shimmy myself in and go, what's in there? And so that was really the germ for Eloise Montgomery, Finley's grandmother. And then when Eloise turned up at the end of Fragile, which published in 2010, I was just like, oh, a psychic. That's interesting. Even if she's a fraud, it's still interesting. But then she had this really tiny role
Right.
to play in Fragile. And so I became like sort of semi-obsessed with her. And she got her own book, and she kept, popping up in other books. And she kept having a role to play in these other stories. And then I was able to really develop her in a e-original novella called The Whispering Hollows. And
Mm.
it was within those three stories that I really started to get to know Finley. She had a big role to play in that novella, which is really like a novella in three parts. And originally it was published as shorts, but it really does belong in one package. But it was there that I got to know Finley, and the questions I had about her from those short stories inspired me to write Incan Bone.
Okay. So interesting because a couple of my questions were how did you decide to present The Whispering Hollows the way you did with the three different stories as a novella as opposed to just straight out writing its own novel?
It was just a kind of I mean, I just had this opportunity. Simon and Schuster asked me to write a short story, and everybody was kind of into Eloise and wanted to know more about her. And I had been, I always felt frustrated at the end of every book about Eloise, that I knew that there was way more about her that I could learn, that I wanted to explore. And so I was really excited to write the story, but it just sort of happened that, it was one story, and then it was, okay, well, I guess I'm going to write another one, and then I guess I'm going to write another one. They were all like, it was almost like they were waiting there to be written. And part of the stories kind of predate Fragile, and part of it kind of weaves itself in between Crazy Love You and In the Blood. So it tells itself in this really twisty way that I did not expect. I mean, it was just completely like an organic storytelling experience. So then it was one book, and then it was one short story, and then two, and then three, and then, so they were kind of out there. And then I think, I kind of felt like, well, they're not really three separate short stories. It's really a novella.
Right.
And so Simon & Schuster was like, at my, ever giving patient publisher was like, well, okay, let's package it that way. So they, they reissued it as a novella, and, I think we all feel better about that, because they really do belong. They really do belong together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what can fans of your novel expect to see from Incan Bone?
Well, it's definitely, so people who have been reading in the prescribed Lisa Unger order of how to read the books, and you know who you are because it's out there on the web. But
yes, which you can find reading orders at your website.
Exactly,
correct?
You definitely can, as well as like a very detailed blog about how I think you should be reading. That said, everything does stand alone. Like, every book is its own universe, so anybody can kind of enter at any point. But I think that what people who have been reading for a long time is they're going to find a lot of questions about the Hollows are addressed, if not answered. Some questions are answered, some remain. I think it's a big evolution for Eloise. Her role in the books definitely takes a turn, and it's an introduction to Finley, who I think people will remember from earlier mentions, and then
right.
Small in the Whispering Hollows, she's just a kid. She's just a little girl. And what's notable about her, as opposed to Eloise, is that she is native to her abilities. Like, she was born or has been experiencing this type of event since she was a little girl, whereas Eloise got her abilities, or however you want to call it, after a terrible accident. So that's a little bit where they differ in their experience. But I think it's you're going to find a thriller, and hopefully sort of lots to think about, and hopefully you'll still be thinking about them after the book is closed. I know I am.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to step back for a minute. Can you talk a little bit about how you just started writing and got into it and knew that psychological thrillers were going to be what you wanted to write about?
Well, there's not a whole lot of as far as that goes, like why psychological thrillers are. I don't feel like I ever chose that any more than I ever chose to be a writer in the first place. I've been a writer as long as I can remember. I don't actually remember a time before I defined myself that way. And it was something that I did, all through, through grade school and high school, and, sort of won awards and scholarships, and then went on to study writing and literature in college. So I never really thought of myself as anything else but that. And, but I never really thought that I would be able to, to be that thing. Like it never seemed possible.
Mm.
And mainly that's because, that's what my dad told me. He thought, wow, this is a nice hobby for you, but you really should be
Yeah,
thinking
nice for
about
you.
getting an actual job.
Mm.
And it's nice that, you'll have this thing, to fill all your, empty hours in the future, but, you need to
Right.
go to work kind of thing. And so I kind of had that, and it's not bad advice, P.S. But I kind of had
No, not
that in my
horrible.
head,
No.
get a job. That's good advice for all writers. And I kind of had that in my head when I graduated. I didn't have the confidence really in my abilities at the time, even though I had already started my first novel when I was 19. I started it when I was in college. So I
Wow.
went into publishing, which is kind of the closest thing I could do to following my dreams without actually following my dreams. And was kind of a closet writer over the next, several years. While, unfortunately, I was also very good at my job. So it kept just getting bigger and bigger. And the time I spent writing kept getting smaller and smaller. And, until finally, I just wasn't writing at all. And I had like a moment
Wow.
in my life where I thought, wow, you're going to have to look back 5 years or 10 years from now and say, you never even tried. You never even tried to do it. So that's the point where I got really serious about my writing. I started doing the only thing you really need to do to be a writer, and that's write. And from that day forward, I wrote every day until I finished that novel that I began when I was 19 and finished when I was 29. So that's 10 years. It's not that
Wow.
long a book.
That's amazing.
It really isn't. But then, I kind of shelved it, and I still was just happy to have finished the book at all. Because, a lot of people have the intention to write a novel. And, the
Right.
act of writing it is very different than the intention. So I was happy that I had actually accomplished that much. And I kind of shelved it, and I went down to Key West, and I went to a place called Sloppy Joe's, which I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's kind of like this famed, watering hole in Key West,
Uh-huh.
and that's where I met my husband. And that was like, it was kind of a big moment. It was like a love at first sight moment. And within 6 months, we had both quit our jobs and sold our homes and, moved to Florida. And before I went, I took my book and sent it to my 5 top choice agents and kind of went for broke. I gave myself a year to sell that book and write another one. And here we are, 14 novels later. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the abridged version.
Slightly successful.
Yeah, I think it might work out.
Okay. Stick with it. Why not?
Yeah, it could.
So what is it? I think it's pretty obvious from your writing and just hearing you talk that you obviously have an interest in the human psyche. How has your kind of research and understanding changed over the years for you for each book?
Well, I mean, it truly is the thing that drives me through most of it drives me through most of my novels is like this kind of ferocious curiosity that I have about the human psyche. And the earlier
Mm.
part of your other question was that, why thrillers, why psychological thrillers? Because, I mean, it really is the place where you can most, intimately explore, aberrations of human psychology.
Right.
And, it is really, for me, it's one of the most, it's probably for everybody this, this big question of, what makes us who we are? Is it nature or is it nurture or is it, some impossibly like complicated helix of both of those things? And
Right.
and the research that just the brain research that it has sort of burgeoned over the last 10 years has given so much more insight into what makes us tick as human beings, and I find that really fascinating. And so a lot of my books are just really kind of deep dives into the human psyche, whether I'm looking at trauma or addiction or relationships or romantic relationships or friendships or people who are kind of deranged or troubled, like these are always the questions that, always the things that I'm curious about finding answers to. And so I think,
Yeah.
that's, and the research is ongoing. If I have to, if I want to learn about a certain, type of mental illness, I'll do all the research necessary for that. I have people that I can call and have long conversations with about addiction and or trauma or split personality or all of these things. So I continue to kind of delve into those areas, just as a matter of personal interest, and it continues to fuel my fiction.
Interesting. What is it maybe specifically about trauma and fear that readers of thrillers are so drawn to? Why are we so interested in that twisted story?
Well, I think that people come to it as readers for a lot of the same reasons that writers come to it. It's a fiction, particularly crime fiction, is a safe place to metabolize our fears. When we look out into the world, we can see a lot of examples of injustice and chaos and, horrible people doing horrible things. And it's very frightening, because there's a definite vibe of sort of chaos in the world. And in fiction, for the writer, it's a place to sort of order the chaos on the page. For me, it's a way to try to understand things that are, so far from, my sort of personal understanding. It's a way for me to explore it, and maybe by understanding and narrating it, I can, in some ways control it a little bit. And I think readers come to fiction, crime fiction, thrillers for the same reason, because, usually in a novel,
Yeah.
there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. In most cases, some kind of justice is served, and that's not always true in the real world. And I read recently, and this is just sort of a dovetail topic. I read recently that in a book by Dr. Judith Orloff, that she said, like sort of, she was talking kind of about adrenaline junkies, like people that are addicted to,
Right.
anything like roller coasters or any kind of extreme sports or whatever. She says they're not actually addicted to the adrenaline rush. They're addicted to the relief that comes afterwards of not having been killed in whatever endeavor they took place. So
Oh,
this is why people enjoy roller coasters. And so it's not hard to extrapolate that it might also be why they enjoy frightening books or frightening movies. Like you can be scared, really scared, in the safety of your own home.
right.
And
Come out of it just
yeah, and
fine.
you know that when you close that book or you get off that roller coaster, the ride is over and things are actually kind of okay, feet on the ground kind of a feeling.
Mm.
And so I think that that's probably why people, turn to crime fiction, and probably why a lot of people write it as well.
Yeah, definitely. So your novels tend to be pretty character driven. How do you ensure with every character that you flesh them out the way you want them to, or they're kind of up to your standards for each new book?
Well, I like a long time ago kind of stopped thinking of characters as people that I create and started seeing them more as, people that I'm meeting. And
Okay.
I know that's not actually true. Like I know that I am the creator of these worlds and these characters. But
Right.
for me, that's kind of how I experience it. And, I might run into somebody, in much the same way that I would meet, any person kind of in the real world. And, when you
Mm.
meet somebody, there's not like some big information dump. They don't just like, sit down and tell you their life story.
Exactly.
You get to know them in layers, little by little, they reveal themselves to you. And so it is with me on the page with my characters. I feel like, I discover them in layers through the writing of them. And so there's never really any conscious thought about like, okay, I want to write about this type of person. What research do I have to do to create this person? What's his favorite color? Or
Right.
what kind of cigarettes does he smoke? Whatever it
Right.
is. There's no conscious, outside looking in type of decision making.
Mm.
It's just as I write them and get to know them, then they reveal themselves to me. And so I'm like often getting to know my characters at the same pace, that my readers are getting to know them. So they don't know, like, I'm just a
Okay.
reader of my own book while I'm writing it. So I'm getting information
Interesting. I like
in the
that.
same way.
Okay. Are there other genres that you would ever want to try out? Do you ever think about that, going in a completely different direction for your next book, or would you like never even attempt that?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I can't answer that question because I don't know. But what I will say is that I have always had this really dark and twisted imagination, and it's constantly churning. I mean, it was when I was a kid and still, even now as a mom, I think it's even worse. I mean, the things that I can, come up with, the scenarios that I can spin, for
Yeah.
myself are shocking, and I think that, it's part of who I am, and these kind of dark imaginings. And I think as long as I'm having those kind of thoughts, I'm gonna be writing them now, like treating my
Right.
writing as kind of a daily exorcism. But I think that it just might be that's, where my curiosity lies. So as long as that's where it is, then, these are the kind of books I think I'm going to be writing, but they're always going to be very character driven. It's always also going to be about, the relationships that we have, and, how our past, influences our future, and, and our present, and how, why are some people, heroes, and why are other people killers, and how do all of these, how is the whole like sort of the mosaic of human experience like going to play out on the page. So it's
Right.
always going to be that. It's never just about, oh, what's the
Okay.
scariest thing. It's about, what's the most interesting thing going on for me right now.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have a list somewhere? How did for your next big story, your next big idea? Do you have something already written out, like a long list in a book, or is it just very organic how the next story comes to
It's
you?
always very organic. It's always, there's no notebook with, 15
Okay.
brilliant ideas.
Right.
There's nothing like that. There's just sort of, usually all I can say is that usually by the time one book is done, the other book is already started. So there's always kind of
Wow.
something going on. Like, for example, Incan Bone
Okay.
just published, the next book is done. It's complete. And I'm
Oh.
already working on what comes after that. So that's kind of in its
Oh
slow, like
wow.
sort of gestating period right now. But I already have a sense of it. I have a voice,
Okay.
and it's already kind of finding its way onto the page. And, that's
Okay.
generally how I work. It really is about character voice and following the next, loudest, most persistent voice in my head. And, a lot of times there's like there might be a germ, like a moment of like, oh, that's interesting, and it's going to lead me to
Mm.
sort of a swath of research. And then, the best I can describe it is then if that kind of connects to something larger that's going on with me, then I start
Right.
hearing a voice, or I start seeing something happening over and over again. And when that's the case, then I know it's time to, try to get some of that stuff down. Like, you can feel the energy of it.
Right. Very interesting. Okay. Do you set goals for yourself for like each book? Like, okay, next book, I'm pushing myself. I'm going to do 10 more pages each week.
Yes.
Or are they just completely different experiences.
Well, I mean, the goal that I have and the goal that I've always had is that I feel like every day when I sit down at my computer, I can be a better writer than I was yesterday. I really believe that, and I've always believed that. So my biggest goal is that every book I write is better than the one that came before it. And that is where the absolute that's where all the energy and all the inspiration and all the stuff that gets me out of bed in the morning, like that's what it is. I have a
Yeah,
tremendous passion for what I do, and I have been a passionate reader and a writer all my life, and I feel like I owe it to myself and I owe it to the people who read me that every time they pick up a book, they may not know exactly what to expect. It's definitely not going to be the same thing every single time, but it's always going to be
right.
better than what came before it, and that I've never once dialed it in, that it's always the pinnacle of my ability at that time. And, that's really the thing that inspires me more than anything else. And it's the goal that is, the most important to me.
Yeah, definitely. So your fans are diehard loyal, and they're not very picky about what you write as long as you're writing. What has that been like over the years to kind of have that support and just that loyal fan base?
It's amazing. I mean, I have such, well, my readers have a lot of access to me. Like I'm pretty active on social media and stuff, and I do tend to interact with them in real time because I think there's a part of me that feels like, a writer is nothing without her readers. I mean, you can get very, highfalutin about it and say, oh, I write for, myself and I follow the muse and that's part of it, like I am true to myself and to my organic inspiration towards story, but I'm also very, I hope I'm as loyal to my readers as they are to me because I've had the ability over the course of 14 novels to change. Like I hope that, the book that I published in 2002, which was Angel Fire, is unrecognizable
Yep.
from the book that I'm publishing, right now, Incan Bone. I hope that I've grown, so much as a writer between then and now, but that, that it's, so that it's far beyond where I began, but that there's still, this true core or this thread that runs through the stories that the people that who have been reading me since 2002 are always getting what they came for, even though it might be a little bit different every
Absolutely.
time. So I feel really lucky to be
Definitely.
supported by my publisher and to be supported by my readers, and to know that there are people out there who are deeply engaged with what I'm doing. I mean, that's a tremendous gift, and I
Right.
don't think and I never lose sight of that. I'm always deeply grateful.
Absolutely. So you just mentioned before, but let's see. I don't know if you can talk about it. Even though Ink and Bone, it just came out.
Yeah.
What can you talk about? What's coming up next, or is that's in the vault for
I
now?
can't really talk about it. And it's not even like some weird thing where I'm not allowed to talk about it. It's like I literally can't talk about it yet because I haven't had enough time to think about it. Because of the way I write, which is, so much like I don't have an outline, I'm so involved day to day. I don't know who's going to show up or what they're even going to do or what all, sometimes there's a bunch of different voices and I don't even know where they came from or how they're going to interweave with each other. There's so much of that I'm so deep in it that it's almost like it's not until I read that first draft and have done a couple drafts that I really get a
Okay.
sense of like, okay, this is what it is. This is where it came from. This is where, and so it'll be another, I think it'll be another few months at least before I can go, okay, well, this is what the next book is. And I think I'm ready to start talking about it a little bit. So stay tuned.
Okay. All right, we will. Who are some of the authors on your reading list right now? Who do you turn to for your next good read?
Well, I'm kind of a literary omnivore, so I read, wildly across genre. But I'm really excited about the new Stephen King because he's kind of like my I have a couple of literary heroes, but he's, probably one of the major ones. I'm kind of excited that both of our books published on the same day. Like, yay. It must be something. And then I'm going to be appearing in New York with Lisa Lutz. So I'm reading her book right now, The Passenger. And she also writes a really great series about the Spellman family, and she's just a great writer, and I always enjoy her work. I recently read Playing with Fire by Tess Gerritsen, and Tess and I have like a little conversation up online where we talked back and forth about our different, the different ways that we write and the things that we've done. In her book, Playing with Fire is a little bit of, it's not, it's an, amazing thriller like all of her books, but there's just a little bit of a historical sort of ghostly element to this one that really resonated with me. And she's such a terrific writer, and she's somebody I've been reading for a long time. And, I recently just appeared with Lisa Gardner and Alastair Burke. They're two favorite authors, and Lisa's book Find Her was also excellent. So I'm constantly reading within the genre and without. Oh, and I'm really excited about Mary Roach's new book. The title is escaping me. Do you know what it is? But she's
I don't.
I just love her books. They're always so fascinating. So she's like kind of my nonfiction obsession. Every time she has a new book out,
wow, that's a great list. Yeah, that's a great name.
It's diverse anyway.
Nice. So where are you headed next? Where can fans kind of come out, say hi, maybe get a book signed? What's on your road trip?
Well, tomorrow night I will be appearing in St. Petersburg at the Dali Museum. It's going to be a really big event for any of the Tampa Bay pals. It's going to be a really fun night. But I'll be on the road for another couple of weeks. Various stops here in Florida and up north, and all those events can be found on my website at lisaunger.com/events. And I hope to see some people out on the road.
Yeah, and you can also always get in touch with Lisa at Lisa Unger on Twitter and Lisa Unger on Facebook. So she's waiting to hear from you.
Yeah. Bring it on.
So we are unfortunately at the end, which is always a bummer. Like I told you, it goes by so fast.
It went by really fast.
Thank you so much for joining us. It was a blast. And again, congratulations on Incan Bone. And we can't wait to get to chat again about that new project.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me to chat. And I really enjoyed talking to you.
Absolutely. Definitely. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.